Welcome to Horror Audio Series, where the veil between worlds grows thin, and every whisper might be a warning. Here, we don't just tell horror stories. We summon them. Turn down the lights. Turn up your fear. The nightmare begins now.
Some deaths refuse to rest. Some spirits refuse to leave. When the veil thins between the worlds, the soul possessor awakens. Welcome to Soul Possessor.
Chapter 5. The Soul Taker. Master Lee. 3 days had passed since Lucy's death. 3 days that dragged like centuries, swallowing the village in a silence so complete it resembled a tomb left open too long. Not a laugh, not a whisper. Even the crows that usually shrieked from the bamboo groves were absent, as if the dead had told them to hush. Children were no longer seen outside after sunset. Their bare feet, once quick on the dirt paths, now hid behind bolted doors. Every home kept incense burning. Thin wisps of smoke curling into the air like prayers trying to escape. But the prayers went unanswered. The smoke clung to every surface, to the door frames, the window panes, the eyelids of sleeping mothers. It painted the village in shades of ash. Christina was no longer mentioned in casual speech. Her name was a jinx, a thread no one dared pull. People crossed the street when they saw her. They whispered, not out of cruelty, but fear. She was no longer one of them. She was a survivor of something that no one else wanted to survive. That night, the village gathered. Not to grieve, for no one could, but to fulfill a ritual, to keep the dead from lingering. The yard in front of the communal house had been swept clean. On the ground was a straw mat, slightly soaked with dew, on which Lucy's twisted body was laid beneath a white sheet. An upside-down bowl of rice and a lone cup of water rested beside her head. The image was not one of peace, but of abandonment. Christina's mother, wrapped in mourning white, sat rigid at the incense table. Her eyes were hollow, like burned-out candles. Her fingers barely moved as she replaced the spent incense sticks. It wasn't grief that had hardened her. It was knowledge. Christina stood behind the crowd. Her hair was stiff with frost, and her breath came in short, invisible clouds. Her eyes were darker now. Not red from crying, but void, scorched by things no human should see. She was barely alive, save for the burning cinder in her chest, a coal of pain that smoldered but never died. The wooden fish clacked rhythmically, dry, mechanical. A sound without spirit. The usual chants were gone. No monks, no prayers. Only the echo of wood on wood, like bones knocking inside a coffin adrift on the river. Then, a different sound. Creak! It echoed through the stillness like someone had pried open a coffin lid. The crowd stirred. Eyes darted toward the temple. And then, the bell. 3 long, hollow rings. The bell tower had stood unused for years. Its ropes rotted, its doors sealed. No one had entered it in seasons. Yet the sound was unmistakable, cold and ancient, slicing through the air like a blade made of time. People turned pale. Faces stiffened. The old whispered, "No one rang it," while the young clutched their mother's hands without knowing why. And then he came. Master Lee, or what was left of him. No footsteps announced him. No figure approached from the dark. He simply stood there, as though the earth had exhaled him into existence. In the center of the courtyard, just a breath away from Lucy's shrouded form. His cassock, once pristine and golden, was now faded to the color of rotting parchment. It bore blotches of blood, ash, and something darker still. His head was lowered, shrouded in a yellowing veil that fluttered slightly despite the absence of wind. His hands were clasped together in front of him, as though in silent prayer. But what God would answer that prayer? Christina felt her hair rise. It wasn't just fear. It was something else. As if every cell in her body recognized a presence that should never have returned. Every pore on her skin gaped, as if trying to scream. The villagers froze, gripped by a collective paralysis. Even the bravest of them did not step forward. Then Master Li raised his head. No face awaited them, only a void. Where his eyes should have been, only bottomless dark, like wells dug too deep. There was no mouth, no nose, just shadows. But from within that absence came 3 whispers, as soft as wind through a graveyard, yet heard clearly by every soul present. He who swears under the shadow of the tower. He who kneels among the old roots. He who opens the book but does not read the commandments. Each sentence felt like a blade dragged along a nerve. The air turned cold. An old woman fell to her knees, sobbing into her hands. Children began to cry, not loudly, but in hiccuping gasps, as if someone were gently pressing on their throats. Christina's breath caught. She knew. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. Those sentences were not riddles. They were judgments, warnings, or perhaps death warrants, and the condemned were already among them. Then the void beneath Master Li's veil turned toward her. Not accusing, not angry. Just certain. A gaze without eyes, but it pierced her like a nail into a coffin. She could not move, could not breathe. And then, as silently as he came, he vanished. No gust of wind, no rustle of cloth, just gone. As if the mist had swallowed him back into its maw. The courtyard held its breath. The white fog thickened, curling in tendrils around the altar, licking at the white mat beneath Lucy. Not a soul dared to speak. Even the insects, if they existed anymore, had fallen silent. And Lucy still lay there, eyes closed, but her lips twitched, as if whispering something to the other side. A village elder coughed once, as if to break the spell. He raised a trembling hand, signaling the end of the rite. Without a word, the crowd began to retreat, careful not to step too close to Lucy's body, or the space where Master Li had stood. Even in death, she had become untouchable, tainted. One by one, they dispersed, moving like shadows, like regrets disappearing into the mist. No one stayed behind. No one cried. Not for Lucy. Not for themselves. Not even for what they had just seen. No one attended Lucy's funeral. No hymns were sung. No farewell was whispered. No tears were shed. Only her body, wrapped hastily in a straw mat, lay in the darkened funeral chamber of the forsaken temple, awaiting a burial no one dared to perform. Christina remained outside, her figure motionless under the gray sky. She was a silhouette outlined in grief, her presence both a curse and a magnet for fear. Behind her, the eyes of the villagers clung to her like rusted nails driven deep, not out of compassion, but of terror. To them, she was no longer just a girl. She was a fracture in reality, a wound left unhealed. When she turned to look at her mother, the woman simply nodded, an acknowledgement devoid of comfort, as if the worst had not yet arrived. That night, the village was swallowed whole by a suffocating darkness. No stars dared shine, no dogs barked. The air hung heavy with fog, soaked in the scent of burnt offerings, moldy incense, and something far more ancient, the scent of judgment. Christina walked home, every footstep echoing like the toll of a funeral bell. The streets were empty, yet she felt as though hundreds of unseen eyes watched from behind every curtain, every closed window, every prayer-beaded door. The wind brushed against her cheek, then abruptly ceased. Silence pressed down. Then, boom! The sound rang out. The temple bell. It chimed once, cutting cleanly through the night like a blade through flesh. Christina stopped mid-step. Her blood cooled. The bell hadn't rung in years. The bell tower had long been abandoned. Yet the chime was unmistakable. A death toll. A warning. A signal that something had begun. And this time, it would not end with a burial. 3 days later, the blood began to flow. That night, rain fell in fine, icy threads, slicing through the mist that clung to the village like a second skin. The fog was so thick no one could see beyond their own gate. Around midnight, a scream tore through the veil of rain. Sharp. Wet. Horrifying. It came from the Morin house, the one closest to the abandoned temple. Villagers rushed toward the sound, slippers slapping on wet stone, only to freeze at the threshold. The front door of the Morin house had been flung open. Darkness pressed against the frame like a solid wall. But the smell. The smell poured out thick and metallic, tainted with rot and something scorched. When someone finally dared to strike a match and illuminate the space, the light revealed a vision of torment. Mrs. Morin was nailed to the wall. Wooden spikes driven into her wrists and ankles. Her joints were bent at unnatural angles, limbs stretched beyond human limits, as if her body had been reshaped by madness. Her mouth was slit open from cheek to cheek, turned into a grotesque smile that bled ash. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, were filled with gray dust, as if the soul had been burned out from within. And Mr. Morin. He hung from the ceiling by his own intestines. His body had been torn open from collarbone to groin, the ribs cracked outward like a bloodied flower. His intestines looped around his neck like a grotesque scarf. Though he had been dead for minutes at most, flies already swarmed, drawn to the offering of sin. At his feet lay a piece of parchment, soaked with blood, but still legible. The great sin of greed, execute. The village recoiled. Horror thickened in their throats like bile. No one could explain what they had seen. But everyone remembered. Master Li had returned from the temple, and the Morins had once offered gold and incense to gain favors from him. Greedy prayers, selfish intentions. Now their blood answered. Christina stood in the threshold, unmoving. Her heart no longer beat with fear. It beat with dread. Heavy. Cold. She looked at Mr. Morin's forehead. There it was again. The spiral. Not drawn in ink this time, but carved into the bone beneath the skin, red and raw. That night, she didn't sleep, even in the sanctuary of her home. The images haunted her like burning brands. Mrs. Morin's smile dripping blood. Mr. Morin's swinging corpse creaking in the rain-soaked silence. She searched her mother's cabinet for answers, clawing through sutras, fragmented scrolls, old diaries written in blood-rusted ink. Her eyes were bloodshot, hands trembling with the exhaustion of terror. Then, a sound, rustling outside the window. She turned slowly. Nothing. Only the frangipani branch brushing the glass. No wind. Yet, it swayed, like someone was holding it. The night crawled by like a dying thing. No dreams, only breathing. When dawn broke, the dew did not come. The village felt heavier than before, like the sky was sinking toward the earth. Narrath's house remained locked. No answer, no sound, no movement. People banged on the doors until their knuckles bruised and voices cracked. No reply. Finally, someone broke in. Inside, Mrs. Narrath's body was kneeling in the living room, head twisted at an impossible angle, as if someone had grabbed her chin and spun it like a doll's. Her neck looked like it had been snapped, then twisted twice more. Her lips were missing, completely sliced away, as if her ability to lie had been excised. Mr. Narrath? They found him in the cemetery behind the temple. His upper body lay above ground, the lower half buried like a forgotten offering. Torn amulets wrapped his torso like cursed bandages. His mouth had been stuffed with ancient Sanskrit scrolls, now soaked through with blood and rain. His arms were cut off cleanly at the elbows, resting nearby as if offered on an altar. At the graveside, the rain could not wash away the bloody words inscribed in the soil. The sin of sexual misconduct. Execution. Christina's sanity frayed. She could feel it. Something was unraveling. Not just in the village, but in her mind. In the very fabric of logic and belief. She felt like a thread being pulled toward a mouth in the dark. She didn't care what her mother said anymore. She needed answers. And she knew where the answers waited. In the abandoned temple. Where Master Li had once lived. Where he had died. Where he had returned. The temple was not empty. It looked deserted, covered in moss, the bricks flaking with mildew, half-burnt incense, sticks crumbling into ash. But Christina noticed the strange, quiet cleanliness that lingered in the air. There were no cobwebs, no dust, no signs of decay. It was as if someone still lived here, as if the place was being kept in waiting. She entered the main chanting room, her breath shallow. There on the old tiled floor was a perfect circle made of white ash. Its edge looked like it had been drawn not with a hand, but with intention. Something ancient, obsessive, maybe even divine. In the center of the circle lay a monk's robe, torn but perfectly arranged. Though it should have been soaked from years of abandonment, it was dry, preserved, as if untouched by time. Atop the robe, a single piece of brittle parchment. She picked it up. The master has returned, no longer to teach, but to judge sins. Christina stepped back, her lungs barely taking in air. Her fingers trembled violently as she clutched the parchment. She didn't dare blink. The air around her seemed to tighten, thinner, charged with something invisible yet suffocating. Then, the temple bell rang. 3 times. No hands touched it. No wind moved it. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere at once, reverberating through the very bones of the structure. Christina ran. She fled from the temple, down the moss-covered steps, through the creeping fog that waited like a curtain of ghosts. The rain was still falling, sharp and cold, but it couldn't wash away the dread that clung to her skin. But the nightmare had only just begun. She was halfway home when she saw him, Joe. He stood beneath the white frangipani tree, the sacred tree, in the center of the village, where Master Li used to sit and chant in the evenings. Joe wore a thin raincoat, soaked through, and held an oil lamp in his hand. His face was pale, lips trembling, eyes locked on the roots of the tree. When Christina approached, he didn't even glance at her. His voice came out in a whisper, barely audible over the rainfall. "Sister Chris, I saw him last night." She stood still, her soaked dress clinging to her skin. Joe turned to her. His eyes were empty. Not dead, not hollow, just overwhelmed. "Master Li, he was there, at the foot of my bed, watching. He didn't speak, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream." Then he clenched his jaw, fists tightening. He's not human anymore. He's not our teacher. He's something else now. Something that judges. That night they went to Joe's house. Christina's mother had tried to stop her. She had cried, pleaded, even threatened. But when she looked into Christina's eyes, she saw it. The eyes of someone who had already been marked. A soul standing on the edge of something ancient. Something irreversible. Joe's house was soaked in silence. Not the silence of sleep or abandonment. It was the kind of silence that comes only after something has passed through. Something that steals sound, light, and warmth. The small house was dimly lit. The harmonica on Joe's table vibrated ever so slightly, letting out a soft, wavering hiss, like something breathing through it. Footprints, wet, long, uneven, stretched across the wooden floor. But only one set, as if the other foot had never touched the ground. Christina felt a chill crawl down her spine. She turned on the light. The glow revealed the family altar. Old, humble, covered in half-melted wax and faded prayer slips. A single photograph rested on it, framed in cheap plastic. Master Lee. His face frozen in a black and white portrait. But then, the photograph moved. It was barely a second, but enough. Master Lee's head turned inside the frame. His eyes, black and bone dry, stared out. His neck hung at an angle, unnatural, slack as though broken long ago. And then, he smiled. Joe screamed. The light exploded. All the bulbs in the room burst at once. The door slammed shut. Wind roared through the house, even though no window was open. Murmurs filled the air. 100 voices, reciting something in a language too old to belong to Earth. Chanting, screaming, praying, cursing. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Thump, thump, thump. They were uneven, slow. Each step sounded broken, like someone dragging a shattered leg. Christina whispered, "Joe, run." But it was too late. A figure emerged from the back doorway. A shadow cloaked in tattered monk robes. The shroud over his face was stained with ash and time. He moved with the heaviness of something no longer living. Only his hands were visible. Long, bony, the skin gray like a corpse left too long in water. Master Lee. Joe, out of instinct more than courage, lunged at him with a pair of scissors from the altar. Master Lee didn't move. He simply raised a finger and flicked. Joe froze in midair, suspended like a marionette with tangled strings. His limbs twitched violently. Blood seeped from his nose, ears, and the corners of his eyes. Bones cracked in quiet succession. Christina screamed, but no sound came. Joe's eyes rolled back. His chest heaved one last time. Then, from Master Lee's fingertip, a hair-thin thread flew forward and sliced. Joe's head toppled from his shoulders with eerie grace. It fell silently, bouncing once before rolling to a stop beside Christina's foot. There was no scream, only rain on the tin roof, and the soft sound of blood trickling into the cracks of the floorboards. Christina backed away. Her legs refused to obey. Her lungs forgot how to breathe. Master Lee turned to her. The shroud fluttered slightly as if caught by an invisible sigh. And in Christina's mind, not her ears, 1,000 whispers poured in. The blood of the traitor. Satanus is not thirsty yet, but you are already in the cup of blood. Then the shape that had once been Master Lee melted into the shadows. Gone, swallowed by the rain and fog. Christina dropped to her knees beside Joe's body. She could not cry. The pain had gone too deep for tears. The horror was now silence, dense, immovable. On the wall, Joe's blood had painted a single line. the great sin of disloyalty, executed. Raindrops fell from her hair, mixing with the blood on the ground. The stains spread like veins reaching for something buried. Then, from the altar, an old slip of paper was lifted by the wind and pressed itself against her leg. She peeled it off with shaking hands. It was not paper. It was skin. Thin, translucent, slick, and still warm, as if it had just been torn from something alive. On its surface, written in ink so dark it looked alive. 3 bloods punish, 2 bloods guide, 1 blood calls him. Christina stared. The wind howled through the broken window, and the realization gripped her like ice. She didn't need anyone to explain it. She was the last blood, the last breath, the last key, the one Satanas was waiting for, and the nightmare had only just begun. That was Chapter 5 of Soul Possessor. But the nightmare has just begun. Secrets still hide in shadows. Spirits still hunger. And the demon is not done yet. Stay with us for the next episode. The true horror awaits. Possessor, but the nightmare has just begun. Secrets still hide in shadows. Spirits still hunger. And the demon is not done yet. Stay with us for the next episode. The true horror awaits.
Thank you for listening to Horror Audio Series. If the silence feels heavier tonight, if the darkness lingers longer than usual, you've already opened the door, and something may have followed you through. Don't forget to subscribe, because next time, it might be your story we tell. Sleep, if you can.